Anyone can be a steward. Anyone. You, me. What matters is finding a way of stewardship that makes sense to you, that is accessible to you, that fills you up. Sometimes we find stewards in the community, and they inspire us where to go next. I'm Miriam Morrill, and this is Be the Change, Stewardship in the Nature Journal community. So this is interview 4, and I want to say welcome to my good friend Miriam Morrill. This is a friend whose work I have long admired, um, as somebody who understands fire and somebody who tries to help us be able to understand fire as well. And I remember during at the beginning of the pandemic, we were doing these different classes where people could offer to teach a class, and Miriam taught us one about fire sounds. And I never imagined that you could learn so much about fire just by hearing the differences in their sounds. And I, I just, I'm intrigued and excited by Miriam's work. So I'm so thankful that you're here meeting with me today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I admire your work too. It's impressive. You seem to have involvement in so many different things and offer such a warm, generous presence to a lot of what you do. So it's great to be here and great to know you.
Great to know you too. I'm thankful that you're my friend. And so my first question, and this is one that I forgot to write to everybody, so it's kind of impromptu, but what is your definition of stewardship, or how would you describe stewardship?
And it's funny because I think, like so many people, I kind of hesitate to think that, wow, I don't think what I do is stewardship, because I think I have always thought of it as that close, intimate, ongoing, working, stewarding something through a process, working with the land and more closely. So in my career and throughout, when I talked about a stewardship project, it was always those people working through something and carrying it through. And I had always kind of been, brought on as a biologist or brought on to do things, or to manage or help with funding. So I had never felt like a steward, really. But so I think of stewardship as like this strong reciprocity with a local place that it's almost like a family member in a way of, guiding something and being there with it and seeing it change. But I feel like it's this close, intimate relationship with something, especially with a place, is how I think of it. So that's how I think of it, as a little more place-based, and this very intimate, reciprocal relationship.
I love that. I love how you emphasize reciprocity as one of those things, and really truly knowing this place to the point where you feel, I'm guessing part of it because of the reciprocal relationship of how you relate to this beautiful, like, I just love that definition. So thank you for sharing that with us. If you don't mind, for my first official question, I'd love it if you would please tell me about yourself, about where's home for you. It could be many places, about where you grew up, and what made you fall in love with nature.
Mm-hmm. So my husband and I and our 2 dogs are full time in our RV. So we sold our house a few years ago. So we don't have an official home address. We do have a mailing address, which is where we were last living, which was in Vancouver, Washington. So that's sort of, if we were getting mail, it would be going there. But otherwise, we're kind of traveling around and exploring. And see, where I grew up was in Northern California. I was born in Sacramento, although we were living further up in the foothills, and then we had moved much further up the Feather River Canyon, up Highway 70, kind of that forest foothill zone, just starting to creep up a little higher. Um, and we had uh, my father had a group home, and with that, we kind of had a little small sort of ranch where we had some horses and animals and that sort of thing. And I would say that was part of my falling in love with nature was living in a more rural and kind of remote place and having different animals that we got to spend our lives with, having a horse and having, cats and dogs and other pets. And we had raised chickens for a period and goats for a period and rabbits. And I think just that regular interaction. I think sometimes they talk about love as that ongoing, learning and respect and connecting. And I feel like just that ongoing time interacting with nature all the time was a big part of it for me. I had also, with being in the group home, they were boys and they were very traumatized, and some of them were pretty violent. So they experienced a lot of violence growing up. And that also um, sort of drove me out more into the woods and a little more spending, even though I had siblings, I still, and I was the oldest, I tended to spend a lot of time alone. And I think part of that was just looking for places to go to get away from that. So I think it was a combo of love of having nature and things, but there was also an escape and a refuge that I think I found by going out into nature. I felt it's not always completely safe, but I felt safer and felt more at peace in nature. So I think that's, I guess, what I'd say my start to falling in love with nature.
That makes sense. So both getting to grow up really around and connected with nature through where you lived and then through your experiences with the horses and the other animals, and then also seeking it out as a refuge, away from some of the violence that you were saying in the boys. That makes a lot of sense. And what made you get interested in fire?
You know, my husband, he was a well, he's retired now, but he'd been a firefighter when I met him. And I was going to junior college and not really sure what I was doing. And so he kind of talked me into seeking out some jobs with the U.S. Forest Service, which is where he was working seasonally while I was going to school. And so just knowing what he did and that I wanted any and all kind of training I could get. I just wanted lots of experience and training. I actually started off to be a wildlife biologist. So I wasn't necessarily looking for a career in fire. I was going to school to be a wildlife biologist. And that's what I started my career off as. But the nice thing when I was doing like that kind of field work with the Forest Service is you can get all those additional training. And so as a biologist, I got all my firefighter training. And so every season I was filling in on the fire engines and with hand crews and helping with prescribed burns. And so it, it was just a part of gaining training. But as I started doing it, and there's definitely a strong camaraderie with fire people. And so I did sort of fall in love with that camaraderie of, I think part of it, I don't know, like if you've gone on a challenging physical adventure or even just camping or a road trip, and you kind of have to struggle with somebody, you kind of have this bond. And I think that part of it early on was like, oh man, we're working so hard and we're so dirty, but you're laughing and you're suffering together and it's adventurous. And so I think that's where I first had a taste for it. But I'd always looked at it as collateral, secondary to my work as a biologist until about mid career. I had moved into office positions as a biologist, and I didn't really love that part of it. It was, I wanted to be in the field. And fire, even at a management level, you get out more and you're doing more out in the field. And I had been recruited into a new type of a job back then that was fire mitigation, which is a big deal now, but they really didn't have positions like that to do education and planning and working with communities. And so, because of my biology background and I'd done some communication, I was recruited and it was a promotion to move into this fire job. And so that was kind of mid career, even though I'd always been supporting fire incidents. So even as a biologist, I would go off and fight fire off and on, but I didn't work full time until mid career. And then I finished my career as in fire as well.
That's really cool. Like I you would never think that you could get like that you would learn fire by doing on the job stuff, but that they would offer that and have that resource. Like I always imagined that you had to go to like some special fire school, but I think that's really cool that they offer you that like on the job if you're interested in it. Plus it makes so much more sense to just be able to learn that stuff on the job. And I completely hear what you're saying when you talk about that camaraderie that you have with people when you're doing that physical work together. And I love it when you said and suffering together and having fun together. Can relate to that. Um, because then you have to know you can really depend on each other. Because you're doing that physical work together. It can't be that you lift something while somebody else is lifting something, then they drop it before you do, because then it's going to hurt you or them. And so you have to be able to really trust and listen to each other doing that kind of work. So that's really awesome. And props to you for working in fire mitigation and education. Um, I'm, in fact, that actually leads me to my next question is could you tell us more about your stewardship work?
So I guess that's the trick of me trying to sell myself on that what I do is stewardship. I would say that my stewardship type of work is maybe more of supporting the stewards. So because so much of my career until when I was in the field, it was different, but I had been in more management positions where I'm not out in the field much, but I'm providing training. I'm providing, helping get funding. I'm writing plans. I'm building partnerships. I'm doing educational materials. And so I guess I think my career and what I do now is a little more of empowering the stewards. If I were, and maybe other people would say, no, you're a steward. But I think that because I'm not working even at a home, I'm not managing a single yard, I'm traveling around. And so I don't feel like I'm a steward of a place as much as maybe people. And especially in what I do now, which is not really fire mitigation, it's um, how to observe and nature journal about the fire environment, the whole how is fire a part of this place? How do you observe that? What do you look at? What does it tell you? That's what I do now. And so I guess I'm sort of stewarding this approach to learning to become aware and how to observe fire in your local environment. So if I were a steward, it would be stewarding that effort, that learning approach. That makes sense.
I definitely think that that's stewardship. At least but I think it is. But it matters more what you think is stewardship. But I say that, well, I've met a lot of people, and I agree, who believe education to be stewardship. And then being able to find ways of supporting the stewards, I think that that is too stewardship. And like I was saying earlier, I've gotten to only like see a little of the content of the book that you're working on, but I'm guessing that like a lot of what you're doing in that book, a lot of the education that you're visualizing and writing about are things that you learned from field experience and from doing your own stewardship out in the field. And I think that is definitely stewardship to share that, to share your experiences and your knowledge and to teach people how to look at the field. I have
Cool, but I'm a steward.
I think you are. So when you nature journal your work, um, because that's what I noticed is your book is a lot of based on your nature journaling of those places, right? Or
Lots of different places where I travel. Um, there are a lot of illustrations, which I don't consider nature journal pages, probably equal or more of illustrations to communicate the science and the observations, because a lot of times nature journaling is going to be quicker and not as articulate as getting all the details and lining things up that I do in illustrations. And so I have a mix. I have illustrations which are not always places I've been. It's like, okay, I've got some references, but I need to change a few things for the illustration to work and piece it together. So it's a combination. But yes, my journal pages are places that, I'm in Arizona and I'm out there journaling, looking at, what are things related to fire that I'd look at. And I journal that there, and then Washington State and different places. So that's what my example journal pages in there would be, my actual journaling.
very cool. I remember seeing some of your journal pages, and I think that's awesome that you have a mix. I think I think sometimes we'll get kind of stuck between the two because we think either that our journal pages have to be perfect illustrations, or else we think that we're not like, or else sometimes it's just hard to figure out what to do with each practice. And so I love that you mix the two. Um, and that your diagrams, it sounds like you base them off of experiences of places you've been, but you will sometimes change things, like you were saying, in order to make it more understandable, or to communicate the clear bit that you're wanting people to look at. Would that be sort of true?
Yes, and some of them are completely um, not fantastical, but for example, the chapter I'm trying to finish up now is on fire regimes, which is super complicated to talk about over time, that relationship. And I wanted to do one of the attributes of a fire regime is how often fire returns to an area. And I'm thinking of, it's still complicated to me. So how do I visualize this? And I basically have a diagram illustration of three layers of circles for elevation: low elevation, high elevation, or middle elevation, high elevation. And then I have little photo inserts of habitat. And then on the rings, I have the periods of time of when fires occur at different elevations. So I have like that circle has an X on it for the different quadrants for seasons. And so it's really complicated. It's not something you would see, but I'm trying to convey a bunch of information. So it's like, yeah, I don't want a big detail on the circle of the low elevation because I'm trying to show rings for the periods of times. Is it summer, spring, summer, and fall? Is it just summer and fall? Is it late summer and fall? And so I've got all this information, but designed sort of simply. So I have a lot of diagrams of information that aren't a real scene. It's a visualizing of data and information for some of those.
That's so awesome. I'm just like I said, someday, if or when, no pressure, but if or when you ever publish, I will be one of the first people in line to buy your book.
Thank you.
I I love your diagrams. The diagrams that I want to study them and then figure out how to apply them at my own restoration site. Because it's like you were saying about fire regimes, and California, I've read before that California has a historic, I guess, fire regime or propensity for more fire. And so it feels like fire is one of those things you need to know about wherever you are, and not just take for granted, oh, there could never be a fire here. Um, um, how would you say
Yeah.
people should get like educated, or what kind of things would you say people should pay attention to?
I think that at the very minimum, and I feel like you should put an emphasis on the minimum of engaging your senses. I think that is so many people are so kind of, and I can do that too, are so dazed and overwhelmed with so much going on and so much technology and distractions and busyness that feeling physically connected, I think, is foundational. And especially for fire, because so many of the signs and things that are really important about safety of like, wow, right now is a very high fire danger. And if I see somebody drop a cigarette, yeah, I better like check on it. So, but you can sense that. Your body can sense some of these important cues and signals. And so I think first and foremost, cue your senses and practice to listening to the wind, feeling the temperature differences and being able to go, yep, the wind is now over 10 miles an hour. This is getting to be a worse situation. Everything's dry. I can touch and feel and smell the grass, and it's dry. You can just fine tune that. So I think that to me, reconnecting is first and foremost awakening your senses, and then learning some of those important cues of how dry and cured are the grasses, how fast are the winds, temperatures queuing into winter temperatures over 80 degrees. You're getting into the more fire danger. There's a bunch of little things, but I really do think awakening your senses so you can cue into stuff when it's time.
Thank you. Those are really good questions to consider when you're out. If you're like me and you want to like really make sure that you internalize it, what I might even do is I might make myself a checklist of questions, at least initially, to remind myself when I'm out. How dry is the grass today? What are the winds feeling like? What's the topography here? That kind of thing. So I really appreciate that. Just bringing, I think I read that you'd written sense making to be able to tune into your surroundings more, and then also situational awareness to be able to tune into the
Mm-hmm.
risks. So
Yeah, I think of sense making from definitions I've read and how I interpret it. Sense making is kind of how you relate to your environment. So you're not always cued into accuracy, like you were talking about not even thinking fire is a part of a place. Your sense of the place is, oh, fire's not a worry, but your sense and relationship may be kind of inaccurate. Your situational awareness, if you're starting to practice, like, so these are the things that make higher fire risk and higher likelihood of fire, and you're tuning into that, then you'll start to change your sense of like, I see and sense and recognize how fire is a part of this place. So it's kind of this two relationship thing, but your sense of a place can be based on not even nature, but ideally you're building up a better sense of fire, what the relationship is, and you're using observations and awareness to do that.
definitely. Thank you. And and then do you mind if I ask a question again about nature journaling? Um, I remember I've heard stories that you had organized a group to go up to a trek or treks thing, a controlled burning, and I remember seeing a lot of people's nature journals afterwards. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges with nature journaling stewardship work while stewardship is happening? Because that's what it seemed like, is that people were nature journaling during action. And I was like, how are people doing that? Because that seemed like difficult, but also really something I want to get better at. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it was very challenging. And I didn't do a whole lot of nature journaling myself, partly because I was the coordinator and developer of the session. And I also knew my bosses and people would have thought I was goofing off if they, rather than watching the people and trying to facilitate the thing. So um, we part of designing that session was, we're out there observing active fire stuff. We're not participating in lighting fires or doing anything. We're just journaling about it. And so, and I was still working for the government then. I had two fire people with me. We had to have one trained fire person per five people, kind of a span of control thing with our group. And we had 10 that they know all the fire issues and stuff. And so, I made them the herders of us, of like, you're telling us what to do. I'm making sure all the stuff is coming together, but they're the get back, go 5 feet over there, So we had, and I think that was important to have somebody assigned as the kind of safety and guide of not getting in the way or making things worse for the people doing the work. And so I thought that was, it could be challenging to find people to do that, but I thought that was really helpful to make sure that we get zoned into our journaling and we're not always looking at everything going on or how we're influencing things. So I really liked having those, we call them single resource boss kind of positions or qualifications, but I kind of just think of them as a herder, a cat herder, or, somebody kind of keeping you in the boundaries of what you're supposed to be doing. So I think that was important for something actively going on and realizing there's a difference. We were there. So it's you either have to integrate doing and observing. I don't know how that you could do both, especially with fire. I don't think you could necessarily be, I'm going to try and do some work here and then I'm going to stop and sketch. You probably need to schedule more like the first half of the day, I'll be doing this. The second half of the day, I'll do that. And I'll have, there's somebody else keeping an eye on stuff while I'm in my nature's observation zone.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. That's with all stewardship, but especially with things like fire, safety has to be number one. And if your nature journaling is going to lower your situational awareness, it's like prioritize the situational awareness in the work that you're doing. So smart move to have the herders or protectors to make sure that people were being where they needed to be. And plus then that way people aren't trying to task switch and then do both tasks not so well. And because I like sometimes I'll joke, not that we actually do this, about trying to nature journal with one hand and then have a what are they called, a pickaxe in the other. That's what I meant to say. But it's like you cannot nature journal in one hand and have a drip torch in the other. Somebody's going to get set on fire. It's not going to work. Will not work. So I like your suggestion of either having a herder or safety manager, or else doing it at the end of the day when you're not simultaneously doing the work, or maybe nature, but like memory nature journaling would be a good way too, where afterwards you sit down in a completely different place and you just do what you do from memory. Or did many people were people able to take photos? Or is that generally something that you also do separate from the work and stuff?
No, I didn't originally. So Robin Lee Carlson and I kind of designed the agenda because I had gotten her to partner with me when we were developing it. And we had everything scheduled. And then you bring in Jack and some other people that are just creative on the kind of whim, kind of like, let's just embrace the moment kind of experience. So we kind of dropped our whole basic agenda and just sort of like, because most of the people were pretty experienced journalers, not with fire, but so we just kind of want to let them see what they wanted to journal. So they could be just taking photos and just kind of watching what other people are doing, or talking to some of the fire experts we're with, or just journaling the whole time. So it was a mix. People were doing a mix of photos and journaling, and sometimes just chilling out in awe of like, whoa, look at that. So it was pretty free form. I think in the future I'd want more structured, but it was our first time, and I think good for people just to kind of roll with it and see how it came out.
Very cool. It's cool to hear how the process went and how you would do differently and also what worked. And if if or when like there's ever a trip like that again, and if there's room, I would love to come with you. So you've got at least like one sign up on the wait list right here.
Cool.
Because I thought that that was really neat, that you all were journaling that process, because a lot of us, like before I saw those journal pages, I could hear about controlled burn, but not have a very clear idea of what happened at a controlled burn. And so those
Mhm.
pages really helped me to see what people were actually doing and what it actually looks like. So mad props to you and Robin for creating that.
Yeah. I honestly feel like way more opportunities for people to observe prescribed fire is really going to be integral in helping people connect and support more prescribed fire, because a lot of people like, so Fiona, I never say her last name right, Galogly?
I think it's
No.
Galogly. Yeah.
Okay. Fiona was there too. And apparently she was pretty nervous and afraid of fire in general. And after it, she felt like, oh, okay, this is not as crazy or intense or, fearful as I thought it would be. And even people like Jack and everybody else that are watching what's going on, talking to people, seeing all the things they do, all of them were like, this was kind of life changing on a perspective of prescribed fire, of you have to be there. And so I feel, and that's what I have been trying to promote to people I know in fire that are still doing a lot of the work of, man, you got to make more opportunities for people to observe and journal. And then now you have so many more advocates for prescribed fire and reducing some of the fear. I think it's crucial. So, yeah, that's something I really hope to see more of.
I agree with you on that, especially because of how important it, if we don't learn safe fire mitigation management practices, then we're going to be in even more danger, because of our very long history of fire suppression techniques. It's like, yeah, it's better that we get used to and more understanding of what fire does, how it functions, than live in fear and eventually all get burned, which is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine. I also appreciate your awareness of fire trauma and about all of the people who have now had experiences with the fires. So yeah, I love that you are finding ways to advocate for fire education, for experiencing, like people going and experiencing and seeing the controlled burns, for people to have more awareness about fire trauma and looking out for each other on those things. And I think that those are hugely important things that we could talk more about.
Yeah, that's a whole other. I don't consider myself an expert in the trauma side, but I try to get partners that are. I'm aware of it, um, and know how important it is. So yeah, I think it's to learn and be open and not stress out. I mean, you just can't really absorb a lot when you're freaked out and stressed. And so recognizing that fire can trigger a lot of strange emotions and fear. And so working with that is important in what I do, of like, okay, I need to read more of the social science about it, or talk with some of my friends that are the social scientists in the fire world, and make sure I'm framing things right or thinking about things right. So I think it's important.
Most definitely. And um, do you have any other thoughts about about fire and fire stewardship?
Fire and fire stewardship. I think I'm biased because I'm obviously I'm all about nature journal about fire. I really think that that is so important, to be able to look at a place. When you're experienced with it, you kind of absorb it and learn it. But my husband and I can go on a drive and we look at the landscape and we can see, oh, this needs fire. It would be perfect here. And we can look at it and go, ooh, it probably shouldn't have fire for a while until some other work is done first. But it becomes, if you're familiar with something like how the health of an animal, the behavior of an animal, if you learn how to see how fire is a part of that landscape, you could be a better steward because you're seeing what the land, how long has it been without fire, and does it, you could see how unhealthy it is or how vibrant it could be or will be. So I think that for me, I just believe that learning how to observe and journal that could make you a better steward of supporting or implementing prescribed fire, or just even recognizing and living and mitigating wildfire hazards. I think that, again, learning how to see, oh, I wanted these plants because I thought they were cool, but they're really bad fire hazard plants. And or maybe I like a lot of trees because I don't want to see my neighbor, but trees that close together, it's not healthy for, or depending on the tree species, it poses a higher fire risks. So maybe let me have a little negotiation with nature here, and let's talk about, what I want, what you want, need. This is the situation we should have to address fire here. So I kind of feel like stewardship, I think, kind of starts with that commitment. And I think commitment starts with kind of a trust and understanding.
Um, Speaking of which, how does one go about finding out which plants are higher fire hazards? Out of curiosity.
So ideally, you would look locally. Like, I mean, I do a lot of Google searches, go on the internet, and just, for the county I'm in or the area of, like, what are the fire safe, fire wise plants, or what are the hazardous plants? So I like to look that up. I do have a in my Pyrosketchology book a chapter on um, fire mitigation and readiness, and I created a visual. I guess I call it a visual table, but it's a couple of rows of lots of little tiny illustrations, and like one side is the higher fire hazard plant traits, and the other is the less hazardous plant traits. So your question was, is there information? And there is. And I do have a pretty simple chart that just goes through all these little things to look at, from types of leaves to the way trees branch or bushes branch to how tall or short, or there's a whole little mix of kind of stuff, which was fun to look at.
That sounds really exciting, and I really want to read that chapter someday because I want to look at every plant in where I restore, and I want to get a better idea of which plants to really watch out for. Like, I think I remember we were talking a bit ago because of this minor fire that had happened at my site, and you were saying about how about how much to my surprise the coyote brush can be kind of flammable, right? I was surprised by that, but that's good to know.
I think, I mean, most plants are flammable to some level, but the amount of flammability. Another kind of little trick is that the smell, the terpenes and the waxes and the oils make them more flammable. So if you're like touching and smelling and going, it has that slightly medicinal, astringent, or piney, or whatever kind of smell. Okay, that's probably a bit more hazardous than some other plant that doesn't have that same kind of scent.
That makes a lot of I wasn't even meaning to say a pun like that, but it makes a lot of sense. Because yeah, one of my favorite things about the coyote brush is the subtle smell that it has, that I keep obsessively trying to get everybody else to recognize. And I love the smell of the coyote brush. I can always tell when one's around, because of that. And that makes a lot of sense that the little glands or some packets or whatever within it, the oils that would be, and of course it's the same with the eucalyptus.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the Oakland Hills fires in the early 90s and about the way that the eucalyptuses were kind of like torches,
Yeah.
explosions. And it makes me wonder if in Australia the eucalyptus usually live in damp places. So someday maybe you have to go see Australia and see.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of flammable trees and plants that are dry dry areas too, absolutely, because a lot of those materials are also help keep moisture in and protect them. So that's not Douglas fir, the ones that are more moisture related than just in general. But yeah, so there's definitely uh, the areas of Australia where I've been that had a lot of eucalyptus was kind of similar to California to me. It looked very oak savanna-ish, but then had some concentrated areas of eucalyptus and a little more tropical areas as well.
Interesting. I wonder if it was one of those cases where either the eucalyptus grew there naturally or like maybe they had fire suppression too, and then the eucalyptus spread.
I don't know.
Mhm. It makes me so a hard question. I love it when we have like more things that we have to go out and now learn. So I hope someday we get to make it to Australia. I did hear a while ago that they were planning to someday have Wild Wonder down under.
I
So
did hear that too. Yeah.
someday. I'm trying to think if I've got any other questions. I've just really been enjoying our conversation, and like, are there any thoughts or things that you want to share or that you want to make sure um that we know about? Or
I think kind of, I guess, some of my takeaways in trying to nature journal, and it was has been a struggle for me because I actually had always been an artist, and I never combined art and my field work. And not until I'm older and I'm less insecure and I'm like, I don't care if my drawing looks bad. I'm going to go ahead and just do it because that's all I could do in the field. But yeah, there's just something about letting go of the art and not, and I still want to create art and I can go home and do more, but not to avoid visually capturing your observations because it's not pretty. I just, I know I still struggle a little bit with like, ah, it's looking terrible. And I have to mentally remind myself always. So I just feel like it's a big tip. And especially if you're doing something, that you have to be far more aware of, like thinking about fires, maybe you're not worrying about a ton of very fancy detailed stuff, but you're capturing the data and training yourself to pay attention however you do that. So I think that you don't, even though I have a lot of illustrations that I share, that is not the goal of what you're trying to journal. If you see the journaling examples, you'll see some way more simple, pretty sloppy looking visuals. So I think recognizing if you're looking at my stuff, don't confuse the illustrations with what I would recommend you do in the field, because I would not want people to try and draw the detailed illustration in the field. So I think those are my takeaways of um, don't get too derailed by the idea of art. And especially in looking at my stuff or at my book, recognize I tried to create some pretty stuff, but I'm also trying to convey information. So look at the difference between my journal examples versus my illustrations, and don't get stressed about trying to do fancy stuff.
wise words. I appreciate that takeaway a lot. I know I've been one of those folks who've gotten myself tied up in worrying that my journal pages had to look pretty, but in doing that, I missed out on a lot of the data that I could have been taking instead. And like you said, it's more important to get the data. So
Yeah. I think the other thing that I have noticed that I'm excited to try and keep doing is that I think for situational awareness, it's an ongoing, like always doing your observations. And so finding ways to track your metadata in a way that you can see and follow through trends. So for a while, and I might still, I usually do a 2-page spread, and my right page on the right outer edge, I would, on the little top square, I would have a color code for temperatures. So I could eventually just flip through and look at what were the days that were, over 80, or when was, and I could flip through quickly. And so finding ways to make your metadata, the important metadata, jump out and find it quickly. Because if you're just kind of putting it where you can, but if you're like, nah, my page design, I'll always in this corner put my key data like temperature and wind. Maybe you have a regular spot that you're putting that so you can quickly find it and tie in things. I think it's important to um, kind of code and figure out design wise how and where you want to track your important metadata. So that's something I like to do.
Thank you. And I think that was all I had. Like I said, I've just been really loving our conversation, and I really appreciate all of the information and education that you've shared with me. A lot.
Yeah.